Hi, this is Dr. MJ coming to you from beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. This is the Women in Dentistry podcast, where we feature women in dentistry making waves and leading the industry through the next decade. I am your host, Dr. Mary Jane Hanlon, a former dental assistant, dental hygienist, and now dentist. I am very pleased to introduce you today to Dr. Lisa Lucas. Dr. Lucas is an educational innovator who brings decades of experience as a teacher, coach, administrator, consultant, and professor. She's a professor at Westchester University and also works with clients around the world to be more resilient, reduce stress, and increase happiness and well-being. She's the author of Practicing Presence, a book full of mindfulness and stress reduction practices designed to foster mental habits that can improve attention, clarity, and creativity. It is now my pleasure to bring you to my interview with Dr. Lisa Lucas. Lisa, it is so great to meet you. I know that we have been connected by our mutual friend, Deb Bridges, and having just realized that you don't have a background in dentistry, I just think it's great that we're going to just have this organic conversation and figure out, how our stories connect. And I have no doubt you have some wisdom to share, because Deb and I have been good friends for a long time. In fact, I just recently interviewed her for the podcast. And so, one of the things that I know about Deb is that she wouldn't have recommended it had it not been beneficial for both of us to meet. So I'm really excited about this show. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you are currently doing, and a little bit about your story.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to our channel, and also don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much.
Sure. And that's a huge compliment that you trust Deb. And it's interesting because I too, just like you, are not sure exactly where this is going to go and what the connection is. Mm-hmm. But I've learned enough in this life to know that people are put in your path for a purpose. And if you just stay open and just are really open to any possibilities, amazing things can happen. So I'm really excited, and I want to thank you for taking the time to start this.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about what your background is and what it is that you do.
Okay, so I have a twisted, winded path of a background. I wish I could tell you I was one of these people that was very, very purposeful and set out to do this and went that straight line, but I didn't. I started off as a journalist, and when I think of the state of the world and everything that's going on now, I did not remain in that field. But often now I think I wish I had, because I would like to be the journalist that's completely impartial and that would just report the facts and just tell the truth. But I didn't stay in journalism. Journalism took me on a path that kind of dipped into public relations and sales. I wanted to make a difference, and I felt that it was often I was in the position where I could do very, very well, but I was putting on a persona that wasn't just me. So I, much to everyone's amazement, I was making fairly good money and newly married and had a lot of responsibilities. And I was in a setting where I would overlook a school. And I just would always look out at the young children and notice how many educators weren't paying attention to them during like recess and things. I thought, that's what I want to do. And I would love to tell you there was a really elaborate plan and pros and cons and lots of thought. There wasn't. I resigned and I enrolled in a graduate degree program to get my master's in teaching. Wow. And took, and this number's key. I took a 2/3 pay cut, which back then was huge. So I had to pick up extra jobs to make up that money, and got my first job, talked them into hiring me without a degree, knocked on some doors and said, hey, I can start a classroom here. And so worked my way through that education program and ended up, long story short, to be a teacher. I taught in private, public, parochial school and taught for about 18 years. And well, I think it was 14 years when I got itchy and decided that I was going to go in a different direction.
So you got itchy around 14 years.
All right, got 14 years. And so I decided I was going to leave, and I wanted to take a sabbatical so I could still earn some money, but I wasn't going to get paid for that sabbatical because when I looked at all my choices, the only one that anyone would really support was if I went into ed leadership. And I didn't want to. I wanted to go into organizational leadership. She's, so
We have a visitor, everybody. Oh, how cute is she?
yeah, and there's nothing, as I said, I recently moved and there is not a way to lock her out except a barricade, and then we'll hear all that. So we'll just keep going. Anyway, so organizational leadership really spoke to me. And that was another really choice point because no one was going to reimburse me to take those graduate courses in an organizational leadership program. And I just really felt that there was so much more I could learn there than if I had just continued in getting. I already had many certificates and degrees. I was a reading specialist. I had a variety. And so I went into organizational leadership. And in that program, I was with mostly, it was an MBA program, and everybody I was surrounded with had something called coaches. Now, this was back in like the late 80s and the 90s. I'm thinking, coaches, what are they talking about? And so, like, there were executives and from all different types of industry. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's what education doesn't have. Like, they need coaches. They need veteran teachers to support younger teachers and give them, focused feedback and to really give that type of support and mentorship rather than just say, okay, you're a teacher, ready, set, go. And so I took it at that time to the assistant superintendent, and they said, well, how many students would you have? I said, no, you'd support teachers. So everyone said that wasn't going to happen, wasn't going to happen, wasn't going to happen. So I made my plans to leave. And it was on my last week at that school that I turned and I read the bulletin board. And lo and behold, because I had pitched the idea 6 months earlier, there was a job description for something called a teacher on assignment. It was a coach. And another long and tangled path, but
So they advertised for the job that you suggested?
yes. It's funny, when I went into education, when I left journalism, went into education, I thought everybody would really play nice and that it was going to be a much, much more supportive and nurturing and none of that competition. Any organization has a lot of that.
Especially academia.
We didn't even get there. Yeah, my path, we didn't even get there. And so when I said I was going to apply for that position, everyone told me, well, they already have chosen someone for that. And I knew who they had chosen. And I said, well, they don't know how prepared I am. And so I went into that interview, and I can honestly say that's probably the best performance I ever gave. And because it was my job. I had thought about it. I had done the organizational leadership, and I did get that position. And I was very happy in that position for about 2 years. And then what they did was they wanted me to go into administration. And I did. And then I went back, got another degree, went into ed leadership, got my doctorate in educational leadership, and became, the code word was, I love the name. I was program director of organizational and professional development. And that was the title, but the job was just really doing absolutely everything that the superintendent didn't care to do. It was everything. It was strategic planning, it was induction, it was hiring, it was, all of the Title I, which in education is where you support the students that have free and reduced for lunch. And it just turned into everything. But MJ, I was making a lot of money finally for an educator. Okay, remember, we are talking education. I had earned like the best office in the place. I had an administrative assistant. I've got the window. I've got everything. And yet once again, I decided to leave. At that time, there was a lot going on. There were some personal things going on. I had a mother that had Alzheimer's, and I had a dad that was end stage of a disease, and so I was caring for them. And so there were also personal factors, but I just knew that I was done, and so I thought I would just for 1 year go to the university and teach while I figured out what was next. So I entered the world of academia. And as you've already mentioned, you know the world of academia. It's interesting. I had a good friend that said, Lisa, it's the easiest job in the world. How hard can it be? You teach 4 classes, you've got some hours, it's a piece of cake. And it sounds like you're very aware of the hurdles. And so I was a
The
tenure track,
politics is probably more descriptive.
the subliminal politics, right? Nothing's transparent. I can say that in the school district, I was probably when I was in central office, I was the only female. So I was with all males, but at least the fights were a little bit more right there. In other words, it was blatant. You said what you had to say, and it might not be pretty and it might not have a good reception, but it was there, right? Well, when I went into academia, tenure track position, I had no idea the hurdles I would have. But I decided that, you know what, I'm going to do this and so once again, it was a goal. So I did go through and got tenure, got promotion, ended up becoming full professor, which is where I am now. But I still have never, so money has never, ever been what drives me. Obviously, you don't go into education thinking you're going to be someone who's extremely wealthy. But I have managed every time when I pivoted and changed careers to then supplement and do a variety of things. And so when I left the school district and went into academia, I thought, I'm going to take what I've learned about being a coach and I want a real coaching program. So I enrolled in an international coaching program. It was a 3-year program. And I got certified in that program. And so I opened up my own business. It's LJ Coaching and Consulting. And I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going to do with that, but I just knew I had expertise to consult and to coach others. And then I got some private clients. And, that's now, if I look in the rearview mirror, I've been there since 2018, and I really only plan to stay there a year.
But interesting, life, like you said earlier, life brings you what you need at the moment in time you need it. So obviously you're in the place that you're supposed to be in.
That I have to keep learning that lesson over and over. What's happened now is, in order, you don't have the same, you have a hole as in dentistry. I can only imagine all of the the topics that you have about, rising in that field. I'm sure many of your podcasts deal with that. And in my field, the way you rise is to publish. And I had that journalism background, remember?
Perfect.
And so for many years, I did my due diligence and wrote, my fair share of peer-reviewed journals. But then what I realized I really wanted to do, and you have to basically have a book if you want to get that last, and I realized I wanted to tell a real story about the hurdles that really can happen in any field, in any organization, and how not just we as women, we as individuals, what we have to do to every day begin again, because it's just never over. In other words, you just get through one notch and then there's another and another. So the book that I wrote is called Practicing Presence. And the word presence, publisher didn't like it. Nobody liked it. They said they weren't going to, give it the points for promotion because it was more of applicable to anyone, not just educators, which it is. I really think that presence is the key. I think that if no matter what, we can bring ourselves back to the present moment, and in that present moment, do what you're supposed to be doing with as much integrity and honesty and just full on. I think it's just each moment presents itself over and over. And that's difficult to do. And so that book then opened up a whole nother dimension. And I have to say that if I had my way right now, I'm this close because, got the golden handcuffs, but I do a lot of workshops and a lot of keynotes and things based on the book. And that's what fuels me, is because so many people, I was very transparent and very vulnerable in that book. Over and over, they said, "Are you sure you want to put this in here? Are you sure you want to share this?" And I had two versions the whole time. I had the version that sounded like I was all that in a bag of chips and had my act together. And then I had the version that was really honest about how difficult and internally what I had to do to kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Amazing story. I congratulate you for continuing on to keep paying attention to the signals that you were seeing in your life, and for taking the leap, because it takes a courageous person to just jump out of something that's successful and dive into something that is all unknown, right? So congratulations. And courageous you stepped forward. So that to me speaks volumes about who you are as a person.
And I know this is set up for you to kind of question and hear my story, but since we don't know each other that well, I'm just curious, have you found yourself in that situation? I mean, I know you're not going to elaborate and tell me your whole story, but how have you had to pivot? And
Well, I think most significantly, and I really haven't talked about this before in the podcast, but people that do know me close enough, know that I've gone through a divorce. And so as a dentist, I ended up having to pay. And so it was a very different scenario where, I actually had to go back to square one and start over again. I had worked so hard my entire younger life, paying off the student loan debt, paying off the debt that accumulated from starting a practice from scratch. It was well north of $1 million, and I was successful in paying it off, and was just about $90,000 away from paying off my last payment on my condo. And all of this happened, and I had to, refinance everything. And it was really a difficult time for me. So, you do have to pivot. And that's when I made the decision at that point. There was other things going on in my practice at the time. And I was very fortunate that, I had finished an MBA, and I had really wanted to go back and teach the business side of dentistry. I never did that because I was chosen to become in charge of the clinical operations for the school that I was at. So I never did get to teach on the business principles, but my students know that I know a lot about business, and they come to me a lot for, either advice or guidance on different things. And I've had students call me after the fact many years later and say, "Dr. Hanlon, what do you think about this?" So for me, yeah, I think that we all have moments in time that we do have to pivot. I would like to go back though and talk to you a little bit. A couple of things kind of pinged in my mind. You were talking about that superintendent, and they basically made you a glorified secretary. For me, I think about that, and I think it's unacceptable, especially with all of the work that you have put in. And what is it? And I'm just going to ask a really frank question. What is it about us as women that we don't step out of our, I don't want to call it fear, but why don't we say, no, this is not acceptable. I'm not willing to be in this position. I'm not willing to be your secretary. I'm not willing to do all of these things. That's not my role. Why don't we?
so first, let me do a clarification, because I don't think that it was that dynamic that I was looked at in more of a clerical secretarial. I think it was more of, I was looked at to do everything. Okay, so it wasn't that it was not meaningful work. It was just too much, and it was without a support system. Okay, but I want to go to the real heart of your question, and that is because that's still happening. And so, what is it that we don't speak up? And I just did this yesterday, and I think this is very interesting. So I won't get into the weeds with the story, but a recommendation was made for a new hire, and I spoke up. I spoke up and I said what I felt was true and what was valid. And so it raised, it raised the issue. And interestingly enough, who didn't support me, so I spoke up against, it was the male that made the proposal, were the other females.
And why does that happen? I have seen it in action, even in the profession where, you become somewhat successful and you turn your back on your fellow female colleagues. And to me, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine. Somebody asked me for help. Absolutely. What do you need? How can I do this for you? Show you this, whatever it is that you need. I'm happy to help. And I've never understood that piece of women. And I think that it comes down more to maybe fear, but competition. Like, I don't want you to be better than me, and I have always laughed at that the concept. I remember a male dentist saying to me when I was looking for a new condo to expand my practice, and he said, you can't come to Lexington, you're never going to be successful here. And I thought to myself, well, why? I've already been here for 10 years already. I just want a little bit more space. And it was because he didn't want me to be next door to him. It was not that, that I wasn't going to be successful. It was that he didn't want me to be next door. And I think to myself, there's plenty of room. There's enough space for everybody. I don't understand. I've never kind of understood that whole concept.
And it's interesting because there's enough space and there's enough opportunity. And so I think you either have the mindset that we all can grow when one of us does, but I think it's a natural instinct. I think I'm going to get into the research here. This is what I think, a lot of my research is stress reduction. And so our brains were hardwired to look for danger and to be take care of yourself first. Ensure you're always scanning the environment for a threat. And so someone that's going to do something as good as you, or perhaps better, right? That's perceived as a threat back in the day, right? Because resources are limited and there's only so much to go around. And so what happens then is our defenses go up and people start getting territorial rather than being expansive and realizing that together we definitely are better. And I think if you had an awareness of that, perhaps you would have enough of a pause in your reaction to understand that good can always come from support because together we're stronger. It's so often that those that won't support or that say no or push aside, it's because they're the most threatened. And always, you find that in any situation, any industry, any organization. And that's what makes, leading organizations prosper and do well, is because they have a mindset that we're going to mentor, we're going to cultivate and support one another. And there's enough to go around. As a matter of fact, there's more than enough. We can always, and it's interesting.
I think collaboration to me is one of my core values, because I don't think that we can do anything by ourselves. I have spent my entire career cultivating my team. And when I had my practice, one of my proudest accomplishments was having a team that stayed with me for a very long time. And they were phenomenal. They learned right alongside of me. Everything that I learned, I would teach to them. Anything that I'd bring back from a course or whatever it might be, even business. When I was going through my MBA program, I'd bring back concepts and we would talk about that and how does it relate to dentistry. And so we all learned along the way. And I think that to me, looking back, I could never have been as successful as I was in my practice without my team. I know I couldn't. And, when I see, and it happens, I see other doctors, there's a huge gap and chasm between dental hygienists and dentists in the profession. Having been a dental hygienist for 15 years before I went to dental school, I understand both sides of that chasm, and I'm trying to figure out how to help close it as much as possible. But when I think about But what really is happening in most practices is the dentist is a lot of times trying to keep the cover on top of, it's kind of like a Coke bottle, right? You shake it up and you don't let it grow. Well, the next thing you know, it's going to explode, right? Because you can't keep people that have a growth mindset, that have a great ability to grow and become. You can't hold that back. There is no energy, no strength in the world that can hold that back. And so that's when conflict starts to arise, because one person is trying to keep another person down. You can't do that. You gotta allow everybody to grow. And one of my biggest accomplishments, and I think it's a great positive, is when somebody comes to me, that has either worked for me or been a part of my team and says, Dr. Hanlon, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm like congratulating them. Good for you. If you want to be more, you have to do those things. You have to pursue those possibilities, and you have to be a cheerleader for them.
Well, and so how do we get more leaders that think like that? I think that's the challenge, is how do we cultivate, especially women that are in a leadership position, that have that mindset? It reminds me, if you ever hear we did it I actually brought it to the school districts. It's the tops, middles, bottoms. It's Oshry's works. It's an understanding that in any organization, everybody's always vying for top, but top is also like, okay, so as in your role, as a dentist, you would think you're above the hygienist and you're top, right? However, really you're bottom because your patients are top. Like, in other words, we're all assuming different roles all the time. And so that hierarchy, if you would remove that and just always be thinking about us as a whole, and what you cultivate in somebody else, you cultivate in yourself.
Exactly. And you get those benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable. So I'm going to start asking you some questions, if that's okay, because I think you've got great insight and I'd like to pick up on that a little bit more, if you don't mind. What's the single best piece of advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
Well, it's advice that I'm not sure I've lived up to. I read it. And when I read it, I thought, that's who I want to be. So I think it's Maslow. I could be incorrect, but it's the idea is to be independent of the good or the bad opinion of you. To be independent of good or bad opinions, to just be completely yourself and not affected by anyone else's perception.
So hard to do.
So hard. That's what I say. I would be remiss if I said I had followed that advice to the T, because I think as people, we want to be accepted. We want to be seen. We want to be liked. We want all of those things. I think that goes back to your question about why as women we don't stand up. I think that's a little part of all of us. We want to be acknowledged. And so if you want that, then you certainly are going to have a difficult time being independent of the good or bad opinion of others.
Yeah, easier said than done. Who's made the biggest impact on your life?
That question, I think it's a variety, but most of the time, I can't think of one single person. I think so often it was someone who pushed me, and it was either in the form of a coach or someone that saw something that no one else did. And I think that happens so often. And as an educator, that's something, it's interesting. You said your role is in clinical. So, and my role is in clinical too. So I'm supporting the teachers, the graduate teachers, in the field. And I think one of the best things that we can do is find in any individual that light, that bright spot, and then notice it, acknowledge it, nurture it, and then be amazed. And you may never see the result of that. And so when you ask me who that person is, I don't know that it's a person, but I think it's been different choice points on my different paths where someone said, hey, I noticed that. You can do that. And that has made all the difference so often.
When you just said that, the one thing that just popped into my mind is defining moment, because a lot of those times that we go through become defining moments for our life. Have you ever had a defining moment in your lifetime that has made a significant change either in the trajectory of your life or allowed you to do something that you never thought was possible?
And I think the defining moments, interestingly enough, in my life are when I've been told I can't. You can't do that.
It's so funny. That's awesome. I'll tell you afterwards. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I can just give you, I have so many voices in my head of people that said, you can't do that. You don't have this. You don't have what it takes. You'll never, not going to be you. Sorry, out of your league. And I always wonder is what makes some people be resilient enough that when you hear I can't, it's almost like you hear the opposite. It's just like, oh yeah, watch
me. So I have to share this story, and many of the listeners already know this. So for those of you who do, I apologize for being redundant. But at a very early age, I knew I wanted to be a dentist. I was about 12 or 13 years old. And when I was in high school, my guidance counselor and I were meeting, and he asked me, what do I want to be when I grow up? And, what was I going to do after graduation? And I said, oh, I'm going to go to college. And he kind of had this quizzical look on his face. And he looked down at my grades and he looked back up at me. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a dentist. And he said, really? You're not smart enough to be a dentist.
There you go. There it is.
That was the defining moment in my life. And I remember going to bed that night. And I remember thinking to myself, nobody ever is going to tell me what I can and I cannot do. I remember that. I remember that as if it happened yesterday. So that was my defining moment. And it was because somebody told me I couldn't. And so I have wondered the same thing my whole entire life. Like, what made me make that career choice and that path for my life where somebody else falls apart?
I would love to figure that out, because what makes that? Because what makes some people persevere in the face of obstacles and others just fold? What is that? And how do you get it? And more important, how do you teach it?
Right.
That's part of my work now. Like, what I always want to do is, like, the last chapter of the book is Envision endless possibilities, because there are. We have to believe that anything is possible in order to take that first step. And so many people, when they're told not possible, fold. So how do you teach that? And I don't have that answer for you, but boy, I wish I did.
I got to tell you, I think it would be fascinating to study that and collect stories and see if you could find a common denominator, because quite honestly, if you can turn that on in people, it would change the world. It really would.
Because it would eliminate then that competition for, as we already talked about, not wanting, someone else in the condo next door doing the same practice, because you would believe that whatever you wanted to do is possible too. Yeah, I agree with you. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Oh my gosh. I actually have a few stories that I could share with you of women that have gone through some amazing obstacles in their lifetimes, younger life, whatever, and still unbelievably resilient and have come out on top. And, I am always amazed by that. Always amazed. What obstacles have occurred in your life that you've overcome that you're really proud of?
What obstacles haven't come my way? I think early on, I realized that there's a book that the obstacle is the way. Have you read that one? I think it's Ryan Holiday, like The Obstacle. So that obstacle that was put in your path is really what you're supposed to go through to go in that path. I think I can think back as a child. I was born with, I have this crooked foot. And so I have an imbalance in things. And so, everyone said, she can't be a swimmer. Well, I was a swimmer, and, she'll never, and, she'll never be able to play real athletics, because when I would run fast, the foot would turn in and I would trip and fall. And I just got used to falling. And so people,
no reason not to just get back up, right? There you go. There's your resilience.
Yeah. And so, early on, I think, nothing has ever come easy. It just never has. Like you mentioned, the guidance counselor. I can remember my guidance counselor saying, well, you won't be going to college. I remember thinking, well, yes, I am,
And look
because
at all the degrees you have now, right?
right. And we do that to, it's just so many people we give our power away if we listen to their words, and we just give our power away. So, I mean, those are youth stories. I think adult stories are, when I wanted to be that instructional coach, when I wanted to bring that into the school district, and the idea was that that'll never happen. We don't do that. We hire according to how many adults support students. Adults don't support students. So, like, that was a concept that, education's about 15 years behind industry usually. So for them, that was just a foreign concept. That was an obstacle. Going into higher ed, it still is. There was just obstacle upon obstacle, and like, and I kept thinking, well, once there's a hierarchy. You get assistant, then you get associate, then you get full. It's just a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of hoops that And I said, well, how many years does it take? I remember being at the induction saying, how many years till? And everyone looked at me like the audacity, like we rarely give full. And they said, no, like 15 to 20, 20 to 25. I remember writing down 10 and circling.
Good for you. Good for you.
But I wish I could tell you, when you asked about people, I don't know that I've had little support systems, but not giant. And you said, and so many times, and as I listened to you, and I was a little envious in that you said you've had such successful teams and you realize you can't go it alone. And I've had a lot of, and I always look back at myself and wonder, is it me, of people that have disappointed me, people that have betrayed. And I think, what's that all about? And so if I was asking you this question and you said that, I would think, well, maybe you didn't earn respect because people don't, betray. I don't know.
I find that in my experience, and I'll just share with you personally in my experience, that when people betray you like that, there's a little bit of jealousy that goes on along with that. And they really can't help themselves. But then I think it is a subconscious jealousy at some level.
Interesting.
I don't have any scientific evidence to judge that by, but that is my gut feeling. And, the oftentimes that I've gone through those scenarios, it's always been, I wonder if there's a little jealousy going on there. And, you just got to wish them well and be on your way, right? Because you can't change what another person is thinking or what another person has done. You just have to wish them well and be on your way.
And it's interesting that you said, it's a gut feeling. Anytime someone says that, I believe them. And I think that's part of what we need to do more is trust that gut feeling, really, really listen, and really be present enough to notice and listen, and then not dismiss, because lots of times we cover it up.
We could do so much more if we paid attention to our innate systems. When we are in danger, our subconscious system will let us know that. And if we're not paying attention, we can get ourselves into trouble. But when we do pay attention, we stop ourselves from getting into a situation that may not be good. Or we get prodded to go into directions that we know are better for us, even though we might be kicking and screaming. This podcast was an example of that. I had overheard a conversation with my students, which is the next topic I want to talk about with you, is confidence. And I had heard them talking about the fact that they'll never be able to do this or they'll never be able to do that. And I stopped in my tracks and I said, ladies, I said, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have the ability to be here. So all you need to do is focus on your skill development for the next 4 years, and the rest, if you keep practicing and keep trying to get better at it, will take care of itself. I said, you don't have to worry. There is nobody that is out there that hasn't become successful by working at it afterwards. And, kind of took them by surprise. But then I started to think, I said, well, how can I showcase to younger women that there are successful women out there. And this is when the idea of the podcast came to me. So I went searching in search of a podcast, thinking there's got to be one out there. And there wasn't. Well, at the time, I didn't have time to do this. And nor do I have the time to really do it now. But I have figured out because I'm fairly organized, and I figured out a system that works in my life that I can do this. But for 6 weeks, I ignored this idea. And for 6 weeks, the universe kicked me in the butt almost every single day. You've got to do this, got to do this, you got to do this. I'm like, oh my God, what a pain in the ass. Can you please go away? But if it's supposed to be, you can't keep ignoring it. I was very fortunate because there are times too when ideas come, and if you don't pick them up, they're gone.
Somebody else picks up on them, right?
So Big Magic, have you ever read that book?
Yes, I haven't read it, but I know of it.
Okay, so that's where that idea came from. She said she knew of a woman who, was out in the field, and she wrote poetry. And she said it was almost like she could feel the wind coming at her, that a poem was coming. And if she didn't get to the piece of paper fast enough to write it down, it was just going to blow right through her and go on to the next person that was going to catch it. And so she always knew that she had to get into the house and write it down right away. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's how ideas come to me, which is fascinating to me because, we don't really, even though we don't understand it, we can't describe it, we can't give it a name. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that we haven't gotten to a level where we can understand it yet. So I feel fortunate that this idea did find me and that I've been able to do it because, hopefully it's bringing a lot of, not entertainment, that's not what I want, but inspiration, more so inspiration to other women out there that might need it, that might want to do more with their life and be more with their life. They can do it.
And how long have you been doing this?
Not even a year, last March.
Oh, that's amazing. And have you thought of casting a wider net other than just dentistry? Because the conversation, and I know you're gearing it towards my background because I'm not in dentistry, right? But to me, it's more about empowerment and really support than just that field. Have you thought about that?
I haven't. You're obviously the first person that I've ever interviewed outside of the field of dentistry. So
doesn't that figure?
I know. It's so fun, but obviously there are no accidents. I truly believe that in life. So you're here for a reason. I came into your life for a reason. I have a saying that I read a long time ago. You're in somebody's life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Yeah. So a reason is, you have something that you can share with them or they can have something to share with you. A season is, shorter amount, a little bit longer amount of time, but just for a short amount of time so that you can get what it is that they need to give you or you need to give them. And then the lifetime is, those are the people that you just go through life with forever.
That's a nice way to frame the relationships that are no longer present because we mourn those relationships.
Sometimes we do, but sometimes we wish, I just say, wish you well and be on your way, like whatever it is that you need to accomplish next, good for you. Enjoy the journey and wish you the best,
But I'm sitting here thinking, boy, I would love to explore resilience with you. I would love to get some of those stories and start digging into that because that is what it is. It's because that could change the world. If you could harness and find what that is, and then teach that.
Well, we might be able to work on that together. I'd be fascinated by that myself. You can do the research. I'll get you the people. How's that?
We'll share the people and the research.
All right. So just another question, because this is basically, what it's really all about for me. So it's confidence. And we both know that confidence is not something we're innately born with, at least not most women. Were you in your younger years do you consider yourself a confident woman, or was it something that you garnered over time?
I would love to say that I wasn't, and I have become. But when I think about that, if I want to be really honest, I think I never was, and I'm still becoming. I would love, I mean, it depends on what the situation is. I am a risk taker. I'm not afraid to try new things. I like change. I mean, there's so many attributes that I can say that point to confidence, but then there's also places that I see in myself that I think, you know what, if you were that sure and confident, that wouldn't be your internal response. So, and I think that's the difference. I don't think anybody would know that. I mean, so I could have fudged that question really easy because I can put that external, like, yeah, I didn't used to be, I cultivated, I've got it now, I teach it. But the truth is it's an internal job. And when I look deep within, there's some issues.
Sure, sure. I thank you for being so honest about that, because I think, any woman, if they're being really honest, has a lack of confidence in certain situations, right? We may have confidence in our ability to present ourselves. We may have confidence in our ability to perform a procedure, for example, in dentistry. But, doing something else, yeah, I find I face my best friend fear sometimes, and sometimes they win. But sometimes I put them in their place and they sit in the passenger side seat, and they have to sit there and stop talking, because Joe and Schmo can't be constantly going off in my brain.
Yeah, I say that. I say, it's interesting. Like my mind can be like a bad neighborhood that you shouldn't go into by yourself.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh, I love that. That's great.
I mean, because what you portray here and what you say and how you, I mean, there's so many things that everyone would say, oh my goodness, she's very confident. But then internally, as you said, sometimes I have to like tell them, simmer down. I'll actually fire some of those voices. Like, you're done.
I love it. You're fired. We're all done. So tell me, is there a particular mantra or a quote that you live by?
Yeah, it's interesting. So over and over, no matter what comes my way, I must say it all the time. Everything's always working out for me.
Ah, and see, because you say that, it does.
Yeah, everything. It doesn't appear to be at this moment, but it's going to be. Everything's always working out for me. That really helps.
I read in a book somewhere, and I remember this all the time. Don't focus on the mountain ahead of you. Just take one step at a time, because all of a sudden the mountain will be gone. And so often it is. You think this big, and I don't like obstacles so much, and I should have clarified that with you when I asked you that question. I actually call them opportunities in my mind. Okay, so there's that thing that's coming. Okay, that's an opportunity for me to do X, Y, and Z, because it's just a better way to frame it for me, so that I don't go down that negative Nelly path and get sucked down the rabbit hole.
Right. It's a reframe. It's a reframe. So, and I think I'm a really good reframer.
That's good. That's good. And maybe that makes it more helpful for us to be able to get through the days, and to see those things that are coming, and just say, okay, well, one more step, and it may not be there tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Tell us one thing that people would be surprised to know about you.
I think the real surprise would be that in looking back, even though I've had a really wonderful, successful career, if I could really just wave a magic wand, I would have stayed in journalism.
Really?
I would have stayed. I mean, now you can't look at journalists today and think that that's a journalist. We see with the media and all of that. But I think I am someone who likes the truth. And I'm someone who I'm very open-minded. I can see both sides of any situation. And I think that's often what's missing. I think having some just factual information that's unbiased, I think that would help so many people. I mean, think of how many just decisions we're having right now. I mean, do you take a vaccine? Do you wear a mask? I mean, like, we could go on and on about all of the numerous day-to-day decisions. And I think the confusion is because there isn't a source that we trust. And I would love to have been someone who stayed in the field that people trusted, that didn't fold to a network or if it was print, back in the day, it was the publisher or the editors that drove the ship, you know what I mean? So whatever medium it was, I think I would have loved to have been the person that no matter what was just going to tell the truth.
I don't know if you could get away with that today, to be honest with you, because I think journalism and journalists are controlled, and they're controlled to present exactly what they want. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I honestly question not COVID-19, but I question the management of it, because, emergency use of vaccinations. Okay. I understand that, but did you follow scientific protocols? In some of the things they, did parallel tracks to move things faster. And I understand why, but I'm not jumping on that ship. I still haven't been vaccinated. And, people are really questioning that about me, but I have to say that I'm not comfortable yet.
It's very interesting. And so there's not a professional that I talk to that I don't end up having this conversation with. And I'm right with you. I am very much on the fence. And so remember early in our conversation, we talked about we have to listen to that internal, that wise intuition, that gut feeling. There's got to be a reason that there's something that doesn't feel right to me. And so, and I haven't done the studies and I haven't done the research, but yet there are so many conflicting, not just data and not just opinions, but just persuasive arguments for either or that are very opposing in their foundation. I'm with you. It's very interesting. It's interesting. I wonder, I'll be honest. It was, as we were talking, I'm like, I wonder where she stands in this. And because I'm sure you've had an opportunity, as have I, and I've
done the research, and I actually have done, an evaluation of the data, and I'm still not 100% there. I never got a flu vaccine ever. I'm not one of those people that ever gets sick. And so I'm making a personal decision for me.
Right. And I think that's what you have to do.
Exactly. And I think that, I know how to protect myself. I know what needs to be done. I wear my mask. I wash my hands. I do all the social distancing stuff to the best of my ability. But I miss hugging. I don't know about you. I miss seeing my friends. I do miss hugging. I do miss all of that stuff. And if I have to get tested for the rest of my life, okay, so be it. But I right now, this is where I am with my choice. And we'll see where the future brings us. I find it very interesting myself.
Mm-hmm. And I think even just your mindset about your choice bolsters your immune system, because I think fear has had a lot to do with it.
Absolutely. Positively. Fear is a really tough energy for our bodies to assimilate, and it wreaks a lot of havoc with our systems. Well, I have really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It has caught me by surprise, but both of us are here, and it has been absolutely delightful. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
It was really, really nice to talk with you. And I think a really appropriate close is to say that our mutual friend, Deb Bridges, if she sees you, she just doesn't care. She gives you a giant big hug.
That's absolutely so true.
And she's been reprimanded for that.
That's okay. That's all right.
Exactly. It was really a pleasure. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for taking time out of your day to have this conversation.
No, it was awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Women in Dentistry podcast with Dr. MJ Hanlon. If you like our show and want to know more about us, check out our website, thewomenindentistry.com, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Join us for our next episode as we bring you another amazing woman leading the way for the next generation.